Welcome to the Design Build Institute of America's Design Build Delivers podcast. I'm Kim Wright at DBIA's national headquarters. As we gladly put 2020 in our rearview mirrors and look ahead to the new year, DBIA wanted to take some time to let you know what we're seeing on both the federal and state level impacting design build. Legislatively, 2020 was not surprisingly a challenge as COVID and its economic impacts dominated much of our national discourse. But what will this year hold? Today, we talk to Louis Jenny, DBIA's Vice President of Advocacy and Industry Engagement, and Richard Thomas, DBIA's Director of State and Local Legislative Affairs, about the design build legislative landscape for 2021.
Thank you to Richard and Louis for joining us. Louis, let's start with the federal side. There are a number of things out there that we need to talk about today. Obviously, infrastructure investment is the big one. But first, there are always pieces of legislation out there on the federal side that are important to the AEC industry and design builds particularly. What are some of the things that you'll be watching on the federal side?
Well, we had two bills last year. One of them was the VA Veterans Affairs Design Build Construction Act, and another one was a State Department bill. It was actually rolled into a larger foreign aid or State Department reauthorization bill. And they did very similar things. They would encourage the VA to use design build, not mandate it. We don't want that. We want to mandate design build, but we would encourage them. And the other one would encourage the State Department to use design build for building embassies and overseas facilities. They actually both moved through the House last year. One of them moved through the House twice. And so we're going to be sort of looking to see if the committees are interested in doing that again. The folks behind the State Department bill, that particular chairman moved on. So we just sort of have to see if they're going to be interested in doing that again. You know, we're always looking at, this will be later in the year, we always want to keep an eye on the National Defense Authorization Act, just because that's a bill that always becomes law. And they do a lot of procurement policy stuff in it. So there's always interesting things there's always possibilities for interesting things coming up in there. This year there was actually a bill that got moved through that we have been working on with some coalition partners, just bans reverse auctions for design and construction work. It's a little bit of a down in the weeds issue, but we always want to keep an eye on the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. And then you move into things like hoping and encouraging that they have just sort of a normal appropriations process, not doing these appropriations bills all, in 5 minutes at the end of the year.
Imagine that.
Yeah, exactly. Just because, the money that comes through this process, for the Corps of Engineers, the GSA, it's just much better if they're having a normal appropriations process. They can just plan better that way. They can sort of see what's coming,
especially for project management, I would think, right? How do you map the project if you don't know how much money you have?
That's exactly it. And it's become common that they have to do these short little, what they call continuing resolutions, to give them a little more time. But when they do them for weeks and months on end, that's just not good for anybody. They just have a hard time. They just have a hard time planning. They just have a hard time seeing what's coming up. And then we also work with various coalitions on bills that aren't exactly our issues, but are in the AEC space that we lend a hand on, we want to be supportive of and things like that. And we're actually about to meet up with some of our coalition partners to kind of figure out what might be in there and what might not. Not something, again, that is directly design build, but is something we would be supportive of and lend our hand to.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a lot of regrouping for everybody in the next few weeks, given the political environment on the Hill has changed so much. I think that's probably going to impact everything we talk about for the next however long, which of course segues right into the 10-ton gorilla, which is infrastructure investment. the vast majority of Americans have supported infrastructure investment for a decade, and yet everybody talks about it, and we still can't ever get a bill. There's about a million things to talk about in regard to that. In this environment, given what we know now, there's again talk of another infrastructure investment bill. Do you think that's potentially just not another tease? Is it potentially could even happen?
I think our chances are higher than they have been. The vice president or the president-elect has made a centerpiece of his campaign, Build Back Better. And he was talking about infrastructure investment when he did that. And now that the Hill, even though Congress is only narrow majorities in the same party as the president-elect, that just makes things easier. Like, they're just going to be able to do it. It's going to be hard to thread that needle, though, because they are so narrow. The House of Representatives is very narrow. The Senate could not be more narrow. And so it means that they're just going to have to thread that needle. And we're just going to have to see if the Republicans, the minority party, is going to want to play along, because we still have the filibuster in the Senate. So the filibuster to deal with one way or another. And it's just, they're committed to it and they want to see it happen. There's plenty of Republican members who want to see infrastructure investment too. But it always comes down to the same thing. How do you pay for it? How do you pay for it? How do you pay for it? And that's where people can't agree. Nobody wants to raise taxes, or they all want to be able to hold hands and jump at the same time. And there's not a lot of, lack of a better word, there's just not a lot of trust. But all of the players, are experienced legislators and know how to make deals when they need to. So I'm optimistic.
You want to hold you to that?
Optimistic. Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think the dollar amounts are very much in question. If we're talking about, they passed a $2 trillion thing out of the House last year. I would be surprised if it's anything like that, but I'll just leave it at that. I'm optimistic.
Right. Well, I think that's probably a reasonable place to be sitting right now, right? I mean, thinking it through too, as we get into the January period, I was thinking, COVID obviously impacts every single thing we do, and certainly what you guys do on the state level. Richard's been having to deal with sessions that started and stopped and didn't happen, and all of that. And then, on the federal level, obviously everybody's distracted because we're trying to deal with an international pandemic. So then I'm thinking, well, how is that going to impact, number one, the concern about the fund, how do we fund an infrastructure investment? But then again, we have a history of, from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act during the last economic collapse, where infrastructure was used for that purpose. So I wonder, from both a federal and a state perspective, does that provide actually, maybe, sure, COVID and the economic situations are a distraction, but on the other hand, it's an opportunity to invest back in communities in a way that we already needed anyway.
Yeah, let's remember too that Joe Biden ran the Recovery Act. He administered it, for lack of a better word, back in the beginning of the Obama administration. He was put in charge of it. And I think it's largely something that was seen that worked. Obviously, there's always some exceptions and things like that, but it's something that worked. It was good for design build. Richard knows this better than I. Expanded the use of design build for get shovel ready projects going. We've already been communicating with the transition about that. I think they get it, and so, you hate to say that it's an opportunity, that a pandemic is an opportunity, but it does give, it motivates. It is an emergency, and so things have to happen. And I think that they get that, get people back to work, stimulate the economy, but also just an investment for generations to come. And that's a good thing. And again, you said it, Kim, yourself right at the beginning, like everybody says they want it. And it's true. I mean, you talk to both sides of the aisle. I talk to both sides of the aisle, both parties. They want to do this. They know they need to do this. It's just leadership and threading the needle. Leadership and threading the needle.
From a state perspective, Richard, I mean, there's certainly a clamoring for this type of investment because the states are hurting right now.
Absolutely. And in fact, that financing is going to probably be one of the biggest issues coming into the session. As everybody knows, 2020 was a really challenging year, primarily because of the COVID pandemic. Most of the sessions, are those states that had short legislative sessions, they took care of their business, but a lot of those sessions were truncated, and so basically everything fell by the wayside except for COVID-related and budget-related items. And state and local governments they're really in bad financial shape right now. A lot of their budgets are dependent upon, property and sales taxes, which went away during COVID. So I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest focuses. States are going to be looking at alternative ways to finance projects. So I think we're going to probably see an uptick in P3 bills, which had kind of cooled down over the last 2 years. I think we're going to see probably more bonding and lease back. And all of these things are opportunities in a sense, because it's these are all things that are well suited for design build, those type of programs. And to kind of piggyback on what Lewis said, there's going to be a lot of pressure, especially now with the Senate flipping. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure from state and local governments to do some sort of stimulus bill or infrastructure bill to help them get through this hump. The transportation side won't be impacted as much because they do have user fees that kind of cushion that. They're not dependent upon sales and property tax. But I think you're going to see that's going to be a big focus.
Well, and that's interesting too, because I would think that getting that kind of pressure from your grassroots, your state, your local, your county, the people who are feeling it might actually provide a little bit of push too. And like you said, there's got to be incentive to do that now. Give that push.
Right, and I think it's going to be done in a bipartisan manner too. Roads and bridges and transit systems, they're not Democratic or Republican. All these states are basically in the same boat. So I think, and Lewis would know better than this, but I think also too, when you look at how close the numbers are in both the House and the Senate, I think it is going to kind of compel them to work together more if they want to get anything done.
Yeah, I mean, it could be very surprising because of the narrow numbers. They sort of know they have to work together. And as I said before, the people who are at the top of these things have been doing this for decades. They know how to do it. And, it's going to be interesting to see how the politics plays out. And it's not clear yet where that's all going to land. But, they're in a 50-50 Senate, they have to work together to get anything done.
Right.
And it'll just be interesting. And and I think, sort of what Richard was talking about, I think that there is a better chance now that we could see some real federal support for state and local governments and state and the departments of transportation and the local transit authorities, things like that, something that they've been pushing for quite a while. They've gotten some, but I think there's still the sense that they need more. But then it's again, how do you pay for it? How much deficit spending are we going to do? How much is too much? There's just a lot of issues that are going to be coming at the new administration and the new Congress real fast.
Well, and
Go ahead, Richard.
I was going to say one challenge we have at the state level is state governments have to balance their budgets every year. So we don't have a luxury of putting it on the credit card. So we are going to have, it is going to compel us to, both Democrats and Republicans to come up with some solutions to how to deal with that.
They are focused. I mean, I work with the organizations here in town that represent state and local governments and things like that, and they are focused on this. I mean, they are all about getting the support and delivering that message. It's just sometimes it sometimes gets lost just because there's so many people and there's so many dollars. And I think there are some people, there definitely are some people who are just worried about the deficit spending. And you just have to get across the fact that this is a huge emergency. And, the argument is we have this important talent. If you want to build back infrastructure, you got to retain the talent, the know-how that is currently there. You can't, that's the way it gets done better. So if DOTs or whatever start having to lay off people, it just makes it that much more difficult to build back better. It just makes it that much more difficult if people have been retiring or being laid off, and you have to start from scratch. And I think that argument, I think people in Capitol Hill hear that argument. Let's just put it that way.
We went through a stretch of time early in the Trump administration when the infrastructure, again, as it tends to do, rears its head as if it's going to be a thing, in collecting, shovel-ready projects and making sure that we're ready to really, if that money comes through, that we're ready to put it to use. And for design builders, that's particularly exciting because that's the nature of what we do. I mean, and we can turn around those projects, quicker and more efficiently. And is it likely we're going to see that whole cycle again, where there's a push for, start getting, how do states, how do entities like DOTs, how do they get ready for the potential that this could happen again?
Well, a couple things. I mean, one, typically, most states, what we saw over the summer with COVID is some projects were shelved. Some projects, one of the benefits of COVID, at least in the transportation side, was it made it easier to do projects because there was less traffic. There were some efficiencies there, but for a lot of states that had budget issues, they just shelved those projects. So they didn't go away. And I think one of the things that we're really emphasizing at the federal level, especially for those states that are kind of new to the game, is that design build can really position you well in that scenario. We know in the last two stimulus bills that there was a premium put on having projects that were shovel ready. And folks know, I mean, there were states that changed their procurement just in order to position themselves that way. And I think you're going to continue to see that. I also think that could be an opportunity for progressive design build. Because as you know, with qualifications-based selection, the procurement time is much shorter. I mean, they can start as soon as they have a contract. So I think that is one of the things that will also continue to stimulate interest in design build and progressive design build in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting because, at DBIA, we've certainly already talked about, the need to get teams ready. I mean, this is an incredibly challenging period. But we all know that with challenges come opportunities, right? So if you're going to be able to access if these projects do in fact are able to get started again, restarted, like Richard said, from the COVID pauses, and we have new projects and coming to the pipeline because there's more investment, there's no better time to make sure that you've got your design build teams ready to go than now, I would think. Tell me a little bit about, do we know Pete Buttigieg was an Indiana mayor? I would think to some degree that might be, an interesting nexus as far as he understands more from the the grassroots local level. He's not a federal transportation guy. Do we have any sense of what his priorities are vis-a-vis infrastructure investment?
I don't know that. Well, I mean, his priorities will be the president's.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah.
But I think to answer your first question, and this was something Lewis and I talked about right after. I'm excited about him. And for this reason, one, he's a very high profile candidate. This man would not take this job if he thought it was a dead end job. And I think that, and I could be wrong, but I think transportation will be a priority with the new administration. Where I like Buttigieg's background is, one, local government is one of the key, it's one of the legs of the stool in transportation. Local governments, state governments, federal governments, all of their funding goes into a project. There's no project that just has one funding source. And as a mayor, you get that. As a mayor, infrastructure is something you deal with every day. Now, he wasn't letting, $500 million projects, but, for a mayor, a $10 or $20 million project is probably just as important as that, and I think as a mayor, people don't send you an email. They call up, they show up. He hears firsthand what a lot of those issues and what are those players with. So I think he's a smart guy. I mean, and everything I've been hearing, in fact, I was talking yesterday to a couple individuals that are on the short list for the number 2 job, and he's got some great people that were also, on the professional side, engineers and all that were looked at for this job too, that are going to be part of this administration. So I think he's going to put together a great team.
Yeah, I mean, when it was first announced, a lot of people I was talking to were like, transportation, Buttigieg, like, okay. But then I think when people thought about it more, they're like, he's a really good communicator. Like, he is able to just communicate complex things very, very well. And that's how he jumped from being a mayor to being one of the primary presidential candidates like that. He's very young, and, so I think to the extent that the transportation secretary sort of has to be is an advocate for their own department in funding. I think people are excited about that now. Like, they just like the idea that he's going to be a high profile guy, not just somebody, and because one of the other things we have on the plate this year is a reauthorization of the highway bill. They only did a 1-year reauthorization last year, which goes back to what I was saying, consistent funding. We would like to see a full 5-year funding of that bill this year when it comes up in September. And I think that, he's just going to be able to do that. He also, just as Richard was alluding to, he's also, because he's a smart guy and he's a devoted guy, he sort of attracts talent too. So I'm again optimistic.
With the question mark. That's fair.
I think we can guarantee I think we can guarantee there'll be an increase in Amtrak funding.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Right.
People will start finding out that we actually do have a rail system, and it's great. Well, the one thing we haven't talked about yet, Richard, let's dig into a little bit of our priorities on the state level. I know we've got several states, and again, COVID is still unfortunately impacting a lot of that work, but what are some of the your top priorities right now for going into this 2021 cycle?
Well, one, we still have unfinished work. We have about 40 bills that are either carried over or pre-filed. We had thought with an election and with COVID that There will be fewer bills. That has not been the case at all. COVID will be the biggest challenge, just the logistics to get around. But, you know, we're all in that same boat. So it is what it is, and we're going to make the best of it. I don't expect, you know, the election was pretty much a status quo. We did not have any states that flipped. So we don't have a lot of changes. There were some leadership changes. So I don't expect a lot of major changes. I think there are a few states that have been hot spots in the last few years, New York, New Jersey, California, Florida. They're going to continue. We know we're going to have legislation. We already have pre-filed bills in those. There's some in particular. There's a bill in Florida. We're watching really close because we have a lot of bills that are dealing with the same sections of the law that design build is in. So we have to be very, very careful what happens there. I think that looking at our priorities, I think we're going to continue to make progress in New York. Our goal is to have full authority for design build. Most state agencies, after last year's session, now have it. There's still a gap between local governments, and also the major hurdle there. We have a sunset for design build authority that expires next year. So I think it's important for us to make the case this year that design build is working in New York, and we should continue it. We have several bills in New Jersey, as we always do. The only difference, though, is this year is they're actually moving. There is a major design build bill. It didn't get through the session last year, but it progressed farther than it ever has, which it'd be a comprehensive bill for all agencies. And that bill's carried over, so we're continuing to work on that. I think there's a really interesting bill in Washington that has major sections dealing solely with risk within design build. And what I think is interesting about this is Washington does things a little bit different. They actually have a design build commission that goes through and looks at all these projects. So everything they do in Washington is by a consensus of the industry. So they've actually become, over the last few years, kind of an innovator in that regard. So that's one we're going to watch really close. We're going to be on the defense in Iowa and likely Wisconsin as well. One of the challenges I keep telling folks is getting design build authority is only half the game. The other half is keeping it, because there's always going to be folks that want to cut out, little market niches and things like that. So, we have to watch that. In Iowa and Wisconsin, we were able to put those bills aside. They were blocked those last year. This year, I'm optimistic about Wisconsin just because the Democrats and Republicans are fighting now. Iowa is going to be a challenge. The election didn't go well for us there, so we're going to be fighting to preserve authority. And I think the other thing too that we've talked about is progressive design build. States are very, very interested. Just in the last week, I've been on the phone with 5 DOTs, and they're all interested in looking at potentially doing progressive design build bills. I think the challenge there is with progressive design building, the laws kind of fall into 5 buckets. You have those states that allow qualifications-based selection, so boom, you can just go ahead and do it. Then you have states that have QBS and allow negotiation, so they're supportive, so they could work within that. Then you have another bucket that they could do progressive design build as long as there is some sort of, cost component of it. And then you have a bucket of states that their laws are written so black and white. Some of them are very progressive. Arizona is one of these. They have probably the most detailed design build CMAR job order contracting, but it's so narrow for each one that it doesn't allow progressive. So they're one of those states that are actually there that are looking at progressive. And then you have those states that just, you can't do it at all. So I think a lot of states are they're starting to go through the process of trying to figure out, well, geez, can we actually do this? And so the one thing I tell folks, if you're interested in progressive design build legislation, it might not say progressive design build legislation. There's only one state in the country where it actually says progressive design build legislation.
Right. Don't get trapped on the terminology.
So look at the concept. Ask yourself, what is progressive design build? And look for those elements. And we're helping the DOTs along with that. So I would expect that we'll probably have 2, 3, 4 states that tweak their laws to allow that.
And that's interesting because that definitely shows the arc that we're seeing in interest across all sectors and in just a new way, a new flavor. It's design build, but it's another flavor of design build, which is actually one of our strengths, right? That there are so many ways you can deliver design build.
Absolutely, and I think we have to tell people, you got to stop looking at this. This is not a new delivery method. It's design build. It's just a different way of doing it, and actually in some states too, it may be easier to tweak the CMAR law to get progressive design build. So we can't get caught up in that, and I think the good news there is, states are taking the look, and I think our incoming president, Jeff Neumeier, has nailed it. You shouldn't be asking so much if you can do it, but why you want to do it. Because if you want to do progressive design build, you can probably find a way to do it, within your existing law. The key thing is you want to be doing it for the right reasons. If you're doing it because you're trying to get a project $50 million less, then that's probably not going to work out for you.
Yeah, and then it's incumbent upon us to train people so they can do it right. Same exact drill we face with every piece of design build. All right, you guys are going to hate me for asking this, but because I didn't tell you I was going to do this. But if you think about 2021, how are you feeling about 2021? You can either give me an adjective or a phrase. I'm not going to limit you that way, but looking ahead to 2021, how are you feeling?
At this point,
See,
cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I was gonna say the cautiously optimistic thing too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people want to get things done. I think there's a pent up demand to get things done. I mean, you can sit there and focus on, yeah, but what about this? And all the roadblocks, but people want to get things done. There's just a pent up demand and there's such a need. Cautiously optimistic. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, right?
Well, and I think, Kim, that at least for state and local, we know every year coming into the legislative sessions that 25% of it is unknowns. You just cannot plan for specifically. So you try to plan for maybe 2 or 3 different scenarios for the same situation, and you have to be really flexible. I mean, I think our big thing is, and Lou's touched on, we work in a very bipartisan manner. We try to, if you put all your eggs in one basket, that's eventually the basket's going to get tipped over. And, so we really try to sell, design, build, and stay out of the politics of it, and I think considering all the things that have happened, and I think just the political environment, I think there is a hunger to really try to get something meaningful done. So
makes sense.
We'll see how long that holds.
Yeah, we'll circle back around in 6 months and see. Well, it's an exciting time, certainly, to be an advocate and in that legislative sphere, no doubt about it. So good luck to you guys. And we're going to cross our fingers and be cautiously optimistic, right?
Yep, that's it.
Absolutely.
If you'd like to be a design build advocate, please reach out to your DBIA chapter or region and join our grassroots advocacy teams. To learn more about DBIA's advocacy efforts or download our legislative resources, go to our website at dbia.org/advocacy.